Okay, welcome to 1000 Ways to be a Champion for Children. My name is Alan Friesen. What we're trying to do is be a champion for children past, present, and future. So if you're an adult survivor of childhood trauma, we want to encourage you to get the help you need to live the best life possible. If you're a present person, we're hoping to prevent you from suffering violence and adverse childhood experiences. And hopefully we can set it so kids don't have to deal with this in the future, that we make it so we end ACEs, we end violence. My guest today. Oh, all right, there we go. My guest today is John Curry, and John is a Rotarian, as am I. John has a Yeti microphone, as do I, and he is passionate about creating relations. Oh my goodness. YouTube wants to help me tonight, and I don't need YouTube's help anymore. Thank you, YouTube. So, John, tell us about what you have happening with honoring Indigenous people, an amazing organization. Tell us what's going on with that.
Well, first, thank you for having me on this show, Alan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about HIP and speak about our work. Any chance that we get. HIP is an opportunity. It was a project that was started back in 2014, where Rotarians who do this wonderful work all around the world thought, hey, how come we're not doing something for our Indigenous friends right here at home? And, before starting out and doing anything, they sought advice from Indigenous people to be able to say, if Rotary were to get involved, what would it look like? And one of the greatest things that we did right from the very, very beginning was to form a separate organization that was a true partnership. So it's not a full Rotary program, and it's not a full Indigenous program. This is a true partnership between Rotarians and Indigenous people. And so our board is actually 50% Rotarian, 50% Indigenous. Also what we're very proud of is 50% women and 50% men. And it's stretched from geographically from coast to coast. Very soon here, it'll be from coast to coast to coast as we add a representative from the Inuit community to it as well. And we also have co-chairs, Indigenous and non-Indigenous co-chairs, which is very, very unique. And we've learned how to work together and walk together. Our mandate is really about understanding how interconnected and interdependent that we are. I think if anything has taught us that, it's been COVID, which is kind of interesting because our mission and our vision was actually created before a COVID time period came along to us. We are about building relationships, generating awareness about the challenges that Indigenous people face, and finding ways to work together. Locally, it's a grassroots type of approach. Our concept, as with most Rotary ideas that are very common, stretched now internationally as well. So we are finding it in places like Australia, Hawaii, New Zealand, etc.
I think I mentioned this, John. I found out about you in Canada from Norman, my friend in Australia, who told me about you. Said, oh, right here in Canada. Didn't even know this John Curry guy was doing such amazing work. So
that's amazing. That's the power of Rotary right there. It's a pretty
exactly
credible thing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me about that. I saw the video where you were talking about these kids that were teaching the robotics to some Indigenous kids. Tell us about that experience. That seemed amazing.
So we've launched youth to youth engagement programs. Rotary has its Rotary Youth Leadership Awards, and we've been doing international exchanges for over 50 years. And it seemed only like a natural fit from a Rotary standpoint that we connect Indigenous and non-Indigenous kids right here at home, because honestly, that's a cultural experience as well, and you can learn a lot from that cultural experience. We've done canoe trips. We've done all sorts of other types of opportunity bringing youth together. And one of the things that came to my attention was that some of the schools that are in the northern area do not have robotics or tech teachers. And but at the same time, there's opportunities for technology to be leveraged in some of these communities. For example, Moose Factory was one of the very first to start to get drone technology to deliver to isolated parts of that region. It can deliver things like medicine or urgent supplies. But you also have to have people to be able to manage them, to be able to maintain them and operate them. And without any technology teacher, that makes it a little bit more challenging. And so there was an opportunity where some champions from Toronto, robotics champions, high school champions, were willing and committed to be able to share their knowledge on robotics in exchange for land-based education from the Indigenous students. But before the students from Toronto ever even got off the ground and were booking their flights to Moose Factory, we had them go through Indigenous cultural safety education to make them very aware of the differences and to understand a little bit more of the thinking and the differences that they will come across when they approach the Indigenous students. And these students really did commit to the whole program from Toronto. From beginning to end, they prepared lesson plans, and they were more than ready to go when the students got together at Moose Factory. And that's not a short trip, by the way. It's a plane ride or a car ride, and then you're taking a boat or a train first, and then the boat across to the community. You're looking at a lot of travel to be able to get there. Um, Within about 15 minutes, both of the students started to warm up within no time at all to each other. And as students do, they trade social media information, and they get very well connected with each other. Um, but what was very fascinating, and I think this is a story that you're talking about, Alan, is that when the Toronto students were talking and giving the lesson about the robotics, specifically on how to program them, they spoke for well over an hour. I think it was nearly 2 hours. And I sat there and I was just an observer. And the Indigenous students didn't write any notes. They didn't take any notes whatsoever, but they retained all of that information. At first, I thought, well, maybe they're not interested, but they retained all of that information. And when it came time to program, they just hopped on the computers and started to program. It actually blew us all away because it's a different way of learning. It's a different way of thinking. And I think that was a big part and a big takeaway for the students from Toronto, and including myself, as we observed and saw how well they gravitated towards that technology.
Amazing. And you know what I was thinking? That maybe part of it is that thousands of years of being oral tradition, purveyors of with the oral tradition, that maybe just kind of Indigenous people, perhaps their brains work better for, or like, that's just a better way to learn, kind of a thing. I mean, that's an amazing story. I mean, certainly, I don't think you could have started the program after that 2 hour lecture. Could you have, John? I know I couldn't have.
I could not.
No.
And I have a technology background, by the way. But to retain that much volume of knowledge and information is absolutely incredible. And I see it more and more as I go along this journey that I'm on. And they retain the knowledge, able to act on it and make things happen. It's absolutely incredible. They just need the opportunities and the opportunity to be around people that they share a passion with or an interest with. And then good things can happen from that. And we're even seeing them stay connected now. They have a common interest. And so youth to youth, they like to focus in on the robotics. And, it's unfortunate COVID hit because the students together, the Indigenous and non-Indigenous, were planning to actually compete in a robotics competition. But with COVID hitting, that put a stop to all of that. And now both sides are starting to plan to go to university. So they're kind of past that window of opportunity, but they stay connected, which is really important.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, that's the ills that we have are all related to disconnection. And Would you agree? Like, I mean, disconnection with ourself manifests in poor health that we might have, and disconnection with others is really all our social ills that we have. And a lot of that disconnection is because at some points in our past, we regarded others as non-humans, right? And as non-humans, we could do horrible things, right?
It's a
I'd,
brilliant way to look at it, Al, actually.
yeah,
It's a very
thanks.
smart way to look at it. Absolutely. And being in an isolated community and you're away from others, it makes it that much more challenging for those youth that are in those communities. But here on the other side, they have so much to share.
Hmm.
So in exchange, and we always work to keep a balanced relationship. There was that exchange of land-based type of education and environmental education, which is a huge part of our learning as well. And in fact, I think there's no other group out there that has a better grasp on what we need to do when it comes to environmental than Indigenous people.
Yeah, I agree. I know I was chatting with Peter Weasel Moccasin, and he was saying, "Hey, we were not, it's perceived that we're like wandering all over the place, kind of a thing, but we had specific areas we went to for specific reasons. Here's where you'd winter. The natural lamb forms, the shelter, the access to game, etc. Here's where we're going to graze. Here's where we're going to do this harvest of berries." And so there was like a system to their management and working in harmony with nature, right? So yeah, who could give us better lessons in that regard, right? So
Absolutely. There's actually a term called first law. And first law is about our responsibility to maintain that balance. If you're cutting down a tree, it's important for you to replace that tree for sustainability. And they had that down to a science, absolutely, before Europeans arrived.
so now the robotics exchange one was kind of a one-off, right? But you've got plans to do this on a regular basis, right? Have non-indigenous youth and indigenous youth get together to to exchange culture, understand each other better, and kind of form partnerships, form relationships, kind of a thing to go forward. Is that's part of the plan, correct, John?
It is, Alan, and here's what's happened. So we've learned a lot through a lot of these engagements with youth. And when I got back from Moose Factory, I got calls from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous schools who are saying to me, "Listen, there's Indigenous students who live in the city that have never been out on the land that could really benefit from this opportunity as well. Could they apply?" And we hadn't really thought it that far through at that point. We've now formalized the program, and our focus is really around environmental and land-based education, and bringing Indigenous and non-Indigenous students together for a 3-day opportunity to spend with elders and knowledge keepers, and to help inspire them to be good stewards of the land. And so the very first one will launch here in Ontario of the newly revamped program, and it will involve 25 Indigenous, 25 non-Indigenous, and they will go through the same type of process. They'll go through a cultural safety education program, and then they'll spend 3 days together. There'll be opportunity for them to get to know each other. There'll be opportunity for them to learn about the local area, and to interact with elders and knowledge keepers, and to ask as many questions as they want. Our hope is that in the next 3 years, we can actually hold 40 of these across Canada, and each one would be localized. And an opportunity in 2023 potentially to start doing an international, event as well, where we can take Indigenous and non-Indigenous from different countries, different parts of the world, and bring them together to have that dialogue about environmental as well.
Mm.
I think it's a great partnership, and so you got multiple levels that are occurring. You got the students themselves, but you also got the Rotarians and the Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers working together to put the event on. And
Hmm.
so, when you're working on something like that, a specific project, that project becomes that vehicle for relationship building. And we're really starting to see really kind of good things start to happen. You learn along the way how to work with each other. And a lot of times what I'm finding is people that are getting involved have never spoken to each other. For example, Rotarians have never spoken to an Indigenous person. But once they do, they start to understand that there's a lot more that we have in common than we do in differences. And
John, did you and I talk about Daryl Davis before? Daryl Davis and the Double D Blues Band. Did I ever share this story with you?
You did not. No.
When you talk about racism and you talk about prejudice, it's as that example. These people never ever met an Indigenous person, is the example you just had. And when they meet them, it's like, oh my, these, we're very, very similar, right? In terms of how we see just life as being human beings. Anyways, this Daryl Davis was, when he was a young boy, he's Black and his father's Black, and his father was with the U.S. Ambassador type program. So he traveled all over the world. And Daryl, as a little boy, traveled all over the world with him. And that's great. And everywhere they went, like, didn't matter which color, what religion, what, shape, size, what God you prayed to, everybody got along. And it was all, you learned together in the same classrooms, all those kind of things. So then his father gets a posting in the US, comes to the US, and Daryl joins the Boy Scouts, and he's going down the street with the Boy Scouts, and he's getting hit with rocks and cans, and he's like, why are they throwing rocks at the Boy Scouts? This didn't make any sense to him. And so the scout leaders protected him, got around him to protect him, and then had to explain to him, well, Daryl, here's the thing. It's not the Boy Scouts, it's you. And here's why. And he's just like, blew his mind that how can somebody hate me if they don't even know me, if they never met me? How's that possible? So he starts going to leaders of Ku Klux Klans and offers to have a conversation with them. And so he has a conversation with these, very like just hate spouting, people. And then he meets a Black person and says, oh, like, man, you're like the same as me. And then there's, I think, 25 or 30 of these grand marshal wizards, whatever they're called, I can't remember, like gave up their pointy hat and their robe and said, I'm out. Because just the experience of meeting somebody that you have vilified, that you thought was so different than, that you thought was not even human, and oh my goodness, that awareness, right? So we need more of that. So that's
we
awesome.
We do. Yeah. I was speaking at the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg, actually, a few years back. We were doing a launch of the First Contact series that was put out. And it was an audience of 250 people in the room that I was in. And we had such an overflow, like, a lot of people showing up, that we actually needed a separate room to be able to have that overflow. And I gave my talk, and we showed the film. And then afterwards, I was walking out, and a 13-year-old Indigenous girl says to me, why do they hate me? Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, I almost had tears in my eyes, because I'm like, I'm sorry, they don't hate you. Like, it's not you, they just don't know you. And that's to your point too. They just don't know you. Right. And, time and time again along this journey, I'm actually finding that story that you told being replicated. Because I went to Thunder Bay, and I was with the Rotary leadership there, and they had never visited the reservation. They had never visited the chief. And so I said, well, we should go and visit the reservation, and we should let them know what we're doing in the community. I mean, this is part of their community too. And as Rotarians, that's what we're about. We should be representative of the communities that we're in. And so he was a little nervous about going, and had never been there. But as we drove onto the reservation, he's like, well, that house looks like my house, right? Well, I'm not sure what he was expecting. Was he looking for the 1800s? Maybe. I don't know. But, and then we went in and we saw the chief, and he was very, very nervous throughout this whole process. But what was kind of very interesting was the chief said, well, he thought first, you're here to sell me something. And no, we're not here to sell you anything. We're just here to introduce ourselves and to figure out maybe there's opportunity for us to partner together. And so the chief said, well, what do you guys do? And so as this fellow was speaking, he said, well, you know what, we've just got this new camp that we've invested in. It's for disabled people. And it was about to go bankrupt, and we were able to help save this camp. And the chief's eyes lit up, and he said, do you think that maybe we could hold an event there together one day? Because I have lots of elders who and a lot of young kids who are disabled, and they can't get out on the water. They can't get out onto the land. And this place had boats where you can take wheelchairs on. And the president suddenly goes, Yeah, absolutely, we could do that. And so, the chief and the indigenous people brought the feast. The Rotarians organized and facilitated the event and had the space. And I was told that this was like just the event to be at for the year. And it started some wonderful partnerships beyond that after that. But it was just that getting to know each other and figure out where you can go from here.
Warms my heart. What a beautiful story. And, that's those at our we're going to have our Rib Fest coming up here, John, and we're going to have an elder bless our event, and then we're going to have some drummers and dancers there and celebrate our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and like where the treatment of that they endured for 6 generations from guys that look like us. That's like it's heart-wrenching when you realize the how the scope and the direct attempt to end that culture, to end those people, to end that culture. And you know what? It's amazing that they couldn't do it in a couple generations. If an oral tradition, and then you separate the kids from the families, but the Nachicha, the indigenous people, they are very resilient and they are still here. And working together, man, we can make some really good things happen.
We really can, and it warms my heart, Alan, to hear what you're doing with Indigenous communities with your Rib Fest, and that's that partnership that I keep talking about. I think Rotary and Indigenous people, that's a superpower. That is a superpower. We combine the knowledge of Indigenous people about land-based and environmental with Rotary's power to act. That is a huge superpower, not just here in Canada, but around the world. And wonderful things can really happen from that for sure.
On a different attack, a different approach, or a different aspect, let's put it that way, different aspect. I watched, I was in a session recently with Dr. Bruce Perry and Elder Spear Chief about the neurosequential model. That's Bruce Perry's thing, the neurosequential model, and when a child has experienced a trauma, at what age it happened, and how you resolve that trauma, how you make that child whole again. And neurosequential model and wisdom of the elders. And in essence, he says that the indigenous ways to raise a child were like the ideal. That's the way it should be. This child grows up in a community where everybody knows who he is, who's he or she is. They hear those child. If the child's crying, they're going to pick them up. And then there's all these rites of passage throughout their growth, right? So at age 4, they're a member of this society. And age 8, they're a member of this society. And when they're an adult, they're like a fully functioning member of that community, know what to do, know what their role is. And we need that. Like
yes, we do.
We have the problems we have right now are a lot to do with relational deficits for youth. That would be Bruce Perry's thing, right? If you had, your mom and your dad and your aunt and your uncle, who were all kind of, part of your development as a child, you had a pretty rich childhood in most cases. I mean, there could have been some where they're abusive, but most of the time that was a protective effect and allowed that person to be the best person they could be, right? But if you're isolated out and there's no time for that connection and those supports, things can go awry. And the predators in our world know who to pick, right? Know which kids don't have the supports, know which kids are the easy prey, right? So
not to sidetrack away from your conversation, but that is what happens when some of the flying communities go to places like Timmins when they have to be evacuated from a forest fire or flooding or whatever. Those predators start to hone in on those communities because they know that there's extra children there suddenly, and that it's very difficult to be able to protect all of them and keep them all busy. And so those are hot spots where we have to really watch out for. But yeah, you know what? I grew up in a small town, Dryden, Ontario. You couldn't get away with anything. My mom and dad knew before I got home what had happened, and and that was before internet. That was just with a phone. So, I think community is a lot, and we share that in common with Indigenous people as well, from a value standpoint. So, but yeah, to your point, that it takes a village, right,
Yeah.
to raise a
Yes.
child, for sure.
So I'm hoping that we do engage more with our Indigenous communities. We do engage and create partnerships, and it, as back to the land stewardship, they know it better. Their system was a very sustainable, friendly, eco-friendly system. Ours is not, right? So what can we learn to restore some of the damage we're stop some of the damage we're doing to our environment and kind of restore the health of our environment? What can we do to restore the damage that our youth experience because of just being isolated and not valued and subject to those adverse childhood experiences, right? And as you know, once they start, then that it starts the next generation and the next generation. So if we can make a significant difference now, that will pay dividends for decades, right? So
It certainly will. They say it took us 7 generations to get to this point, and it'll take 7 generations for us to get out of it. And Murray Sinclair continues to echo that sentiment. That it's not a quick fix. But I think that's again another value that we share is that next generation. I mean,
mhm.
we say in our 4-way test, is it fair to all concerned? um are we thinking in terms of 7 generations from now, right? Everything that we do, we might think of the people in the room, but what about the people outside of the room, and what about the future generations when we're making a decision? And I think there's nothing better to focus on than to help that next generation. And
I,
that's what the program's really all about, is how can we bring the next generation together.
Now, if I followed I was looking on your website a little bit. It looks like you're trying to connect a Rotary Club in Canada, and there's, what is it, 750 Rotary Clubs in Canada, with the 660-ish Indigenous communities across this country. Is that correct? Did I understand that right?
It's a grassroots program, right? So wherever you have a Rotary Club and wherever you have a local Indigenous community or organization, it makes sense for them to partner up and get to know each other. And just as what was happening in Thunder Bay and other places across Canada, um, they can really truly start to really make sustainable change happen when you start to have that dialogue locally. You don't have to go thousands of kilometers away. You don't have to look around the globe. You can do that in our own backyard. And I think that is going to be that's going to be really make the change happen. I do have one other thing about youth that I want to mention to you. There's a young lady that we've been kind of connected with for many years. Her name is Riley Yesno, and she's Indigenous woman, a young woman from the Thunder Bay area. And she now works for the Toronto Star. She's getting her master's at the University of Toronto. What a great spokesman that she is. And one of the things that she mentioned that I just heard today, actually, and I hadn't really thought about it. She's the first generation of Indigenous youth that did not go to a residential school, because the
Mm-hmm.
last residential school closed in 1996, and she was born in 1999. And so it's that first generation. And they also the first generation that came along as the Truth and Reconciliation report was being made. And so there's this different mindset that they have, and their focus on how to get to the future as well. So I think in the next few years, we're going to see some really, really powerful and amazing things happen.
I agree. Did you see about the course at the FNMI? Is that what it's called? First Nations Métis University. They have a course right now on that's free course. I took it. It was very, very interesting. Learned a lot, and you can take it for free. It's
The
so
Alberta University has one as well that's been around for a while too, and it is stellar, and I,
it
I would
is.
recommend that for sure. And I think every Canadian needs to educate themselves, and not put the onus on the Indigenous people. They've got a lot that they're working on and a lot of challenges, and right now there's a lot of healing going on, but there's things that we can do. And I would even recommend the Bob Joseph book, The 21 Things You Might Not Know About the Indian Act. That's a great place to start, and it opens up eyes.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, when you, what led me to even more interest in Indigenous folks is interest in adverse childhood experiences. And then when you go and say who has most of the adverse childhood experience, it's our Indigenous people. Why do they have that? Well, from generations of the treatment they've had, for generations of food insecurity and monetary insecurity and poor health and like so many things that have had that compounding effect on those experiences those little people have had, right? So yeah.
I couldn't imagine. I grew up in Dryden, and literally about 60 kilometers away from where I grew up is
John,
one of
hang
the.
on one second. Bobby Orr, was he born in Dryden?
No,
Bobby Orr,
Bobby Orr was Perry Sound.
Perry Sound. Okay, sorry,
Yeah,
carry on.
but Chris
Oh,
Pronger,
okay, okay.
who I used to play in the back. Anyways, that's a whole nother story. But I grew up 60 kilometers away from a residential school known as McIntosh Residential School. And you know what? I never knew it was there. I never knew it was there. And this residential school was on the far end of a lake, and there was no roads to get in there. And so you can't, I don't agree with assimilation, but even if that's the goal, to assimilate, you don't take people into the woods and hide them away from the very communities that you're trying to assimilate them. And my dad grew up on that lake, and he went to a one-room schoolhouse. And so when he saw the kids, he would be in a boat and you see the kids playing on the shore. He thought, oh, I'd love to go there, not even knowing what that school was all about. But when you go there today, it is eerie. You feel that there's spirits here. And we know that there's going to be lots of youth that'll be found buried in that location as well. I met an elder, and he told me a story, and he allows me to share it. I don't use his name, but he does allow me to share the story. Is when he was 4 or 5 years old, he's standing on the shore, playing on the shore with his brother. His brother was older than he was. His mom and dad were, a little ways away, just at their camp. And a plane flew down. It was RCMP officers. They grabbed his brother, put him in the plane, and flew away. And he was too little, so they didn't take him. But he couldn't scream. He was so scared. He just couldn't scream. And he feels, even to this day, that if he would have been able to scream, he might have been able to save his brother, and his parents would have been able to come. But they never spoke to the parents. They just grabbed him and took him. And they know he went to McIntosh Residential School, but he never survived. They never found his body. They don't know where he might be buried. And having all these communities without kids and having no closure on where your child ended up, just as a parent myself, I just couldn't imagine that.
Oh, no kidding. John, I'm just showing up a little, we're talking about some
Thank you.
topics that could be triggers for you, for our viewers. So if something here triggers for you, please, here's some numbers: Kids Help Phone, Sexual Assault Alberta, Suicide Prevention, Bullying Helpline, Child Abuse Hotline. If any of these have made you a little uncomfortable, pick up the phone, give those folks a call, and have a chat with them. So yes. Yeah. I think that as your optimism, I love your optimism, John Curry. You're very optimistic about our future, that we're gonna form some connection, some union with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and we're gonna make a big difference in our world.
We are.
Yeah.
We are. We have to give space and time for healing, and we have to be supportive. But I really believe, and I'm very hopeful that we can make a positive difference for that next generation right now.
Yes. Yeah, I agree entirely. There was something else I was going to ask you. What was it? Oh, no. I was going to tell you this. I thought you'd find it interesting. We're talking about connection with youth, and this whole process has encouraged me to be a big brother. And I'm really enjoying that role. I know I'm making a difference in this kiddo's life. But my guest last week was this gentleman here, Andrew. And as I was having it, and he's a psychologist and a neurosequential model expert. So Andrew and I were having a chat, and I was telling him that sometimes I'm a little concerned about my example, about how good an example I'm being, because I don't always do things exactly the right way, and sometimes I take some shortcuts, and sometimes I drive too hard. And anyways, I was just mentioning those things, and and so he was saying about, well, it's probably good that you're being a little, having some reflection on this. But I thought of a really good way to engage more people in this process. I'm gonna dig a hole, need a hole dug. So my neighbor has a bobcat. I'm gonna get my neighbor to rent or loan me said bobcat, and then I'm gonna get my brother, who just retired from having an excavation business for 40 years, and my brother is gonna teach this kid the right way to run that backhoe. And if he's running that backhoe the right way, he's gonna learn it the right way. And I'm engaging 3 adults in this kid's life. I think it was his comment that spurred me to have this idea. Yeah, why wouldn't I get somebody who's going to do a better job of teaching this kiddo, right? So I'm excited.
That's the way to go. And the other adults are going to learn something through the process as well. So that's a great way.
Yeah, and what they're going to get a great deal of satisfaction from this, right? They're going to exchange information with somebody who's eager to learn it, and they're going to feel valued that they're making a difference in that little person's life. So
it goes right back to our community discussion.
Definitely. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You're a man who lives by the word.
So what else should we, I think unless there's other things you want to discuss, this was a pleasant conversation. Is there anything else that we need to cover off?
I could talk for days, but no, the youth to youth engagement program is the biggest and thing that's going on in HIP right now. And we're very, very excited about it. So thank you for allowing us to share that story with you.
I very much appreciate it. I think you're doing amazing things. Oh, I did have a question that I don't know if it's even appropriate, but I'm going to ask it. And if you don't think it's appropriate for us to discuss, we won't discuss it. When I'm taking the course about First Nations and where we are right now kind of a thing, there's all the land claim stuff, and all the land that's on the reserve land is federal land, right? It's owned by the federal government. So as the first part, why wouldn't the ownership of that land just transfer to the Indigenous folks?
It's a good question. That's a really good question. You know what? The Indian Act is one of those things that needs to be removed and needs to be fixed, but
yes,
it can't just automatically just disappear. And that creates a whole number of different legal issues. And I think that's what we're seeing, that things are tied up in courts. Slowly it's getting there, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I know that they just the Canadian government has just accepted the UNDRIP from the United Nations, which is going to be a big part of all of this.
Explain that again, John.
So United Nations has a declaration on Indigenous peoples, and for many countries had adopted it, but Canada was one that refused for quite a while. And just recently they've adopted. In fact, Canada's making a lot of new progress over the last couple of months, but there's still a long ways for them to go. So let's hope that they keep moving that the positive direction. But it sounds simple, right? It to us, it sounds like this is a no-brainer. Let's make this happen. Yes. But there's a lot more complexity on the government side of that fence.
Yes, exactly. And I am one for simple solutions, which means I lose a lot of nuance when I go to the simple solutions, but I want ones I can act on and I can encourage others to act on. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
John, it has been a pleasure chatting with you, my friend. I share your optimism. We're going to make huge improvements to our community relations, to our relationships with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We're going to make our world a way better place. We're going to see suicide levels drop. We're going to see drug addiction levels drop. We're going to see health levels increase as we reduce violence and reduce adverse childhood experiences. Keep well, my friend.